April 15, 1945, the outskirts of ruined Berlin, Germany. For years, Anna had been taught that American soldiers were monsters who would torture and humiliate any German woman they captured. As the bombs fell and the front lines crumbled, she braced for the worst, endless suffering at the hands of these so-called savages. But what happened next would shatter everything she believed, starting with a simple bar of soap and a shared cup of coffee. Little did she know, this encounter would lead not to chains, but to a wedding ring. In the summer of 1943, Anna felt proud joining the Reich's helpers, but whispers of defeat were already spreading. She was just 20 years old, with wide blue eyes and a uniform that made her feel part of something unbreakable. Growing up in a small town near Munich, Anna had listened to the radio broadcasts that painted the Führer as a savior and America as a land of greedy capitalists who would strip Germany bare if they ever won. Her father, a baker who had lost his shop to the war effort, had always said the Americans were weak, hiding behind their machines while true Aryans fought with heart. That summer, as she boarded the train to Berlin for training, Anna believed it all. The city buzzed with purpose, even as food lines grew longer, and the air carried the faint rumble of distant battles. Anna's days began at dawn in a converted schoolhouse on the edge of the capital. She learned to operate the radio sets, her fingers nimble on the dials as she relayed messages between units. The instructors, stern women in crisp skirts, drilled into them the importance of their role. "You are the voice of the fatherland," one would say, her voice sharp like a knife. "Without you, the lines break." But between lessons, the talk turned to the enemy. Films flickered on a small projector, showing American soldiers as thugs in flashy uniforms, looting homes and dragging women into the shadows. One reel depicted them as jazz-playing degenerates, their faces twisted in laughter as they mocked the disciplined German way. Anna watched, her stomach tightening, and vowed to herself that she would never let such men near her. Helferinnen like her, over 500,000 women serving in signals and support by that year, Germany's output. How could that be, if they were the weak ones? Anna pushed the thought away, focusing on her Morse code practice. The propaganda posters on the walls showed Uncle Sam as a fat spider, spinning webs of Jewish money to trap Europe. She believed it kept her strong, but deep down, a small crack formed when her letters home went unanswered for weeks. Her mother wrote once about the empty shelves, how the bakeries closed early now. As the months dragged on, Anna's pride mixed with a quiet unease. She pictured the Americans not as soldiers, but as the monsters from the films, men who would see her uniform and laugh, then worse. The instructors warned them especially about the women. "They come as liberators, but act as conquerors," one said during a late-night lecture. "Prepare your minds. The fatherland will protect you." But protection felt distant as the Allied bombings shook Berlin more often, turning nights into firelit chaos. Anna clutched her locket, a gift from her father with a tiny swastika inside, and wondered if the stories were true. The radio messages she sent grew frantic, coordinates for defenses that seemed to crumble anyway. Simple things, like a full meal or a hot bath, became dreams, making the enemy's supposed wealth sound like a cruel joke. Yet in those moments of doubt, Anna held to the ideal. Germany would endure because it was right. What they didn't teach her was how the human heart could bend under the weight of reality. As the winter of 1944 bit harder, with snow piling against the barracks windows, Anna's unit received orders to move closer to the front. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last big push in the West, had failed by early 1945, leaving the Allies free to cross the Rhine River in March. Over 1 million German soldiers would surrender that spring. But for Anna, it started with a single command: prepare for evacuation. The girls packed their kits in silence, the air thick with unspoken fears. She folded her uniform neatly, tracing the insignia that had once made her feel invincible. Now it felt like a target. As the trucks rumbled out of Berlin toward the outskirts, the city skyline faded behind them, scarred by craters and smoke. Anna stared at the road ahead, belongings into a worn knapsack, her hands shaking as she tied the straps. The city around them lay in ruins, buildings gutted like empty shells, and families trudged along with carts piled high with what little they could salvage. She had seen mothers clutching babies, their faces etched with exhaustion, and wondered if her own family back in Munich was safe. The front lines shifted daily, and rumors flew. The Russians from the east, Americans from the west, squeezing Germany like a vice. As they marched out under cover of dusk, Anna's boots crunched over shattered glass and debris. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's bold push through the forests of Belgium and Luxembourg the previous December, had ended in failure by late January. German forces had surprised the Americans at first, advancing 30 kilometers in the snow-choked Ardennes, but they ran out of fuel and ammunition, their tanks stalling near the Meuse River. Over 80,000 Germans lost in that desperate gamble, while the Allies held firm at places like Bastogne, where U.S. paratroopers refused to surrender. Now, with that defeat behind them, the Americans pressed on. By March, U.S. troops had crossed the Rhine River at key points, like the captured bridge at Remagen on March 7th, pouring divisions into Germany proper. Their Third Army under General Patton moved fast, crossing at Oppenheim just weeks later without heavy fire, catching the defenders off guard. Anna's briefings had painted this as impossible. The Rhine was a natural wall, they said, but the maps in headquarters showed the enemy already east of it, heading for the heartland. The propaganda had drilled the fear deep into her. Leaflets dropped by Allied planes warned of the degenerate Yankees, but it was the German broadcasts that terrified most. Radio voices, sharp and urgent, described American soldiers as gangs of looters and worse, men who would burn homes and drag women into the night. "They come not to fight, but to ravage," one announcer had declared, his words echoing in Anna's mind as she walked. Films, shown in the barracks, depicted them as jazz-mad brutes, their eyes hungry for destruction, far from the disciplined warriors of the Wehrmacht. For women like the Helferinnen, over 500,000 with abandoned vehicles. Anna's legs ached, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. Their last meal had been a handful of potatoes shared cold. Whispers among the girls turned to home, sisters lost, brothers at the front. One, a quiet girl named Greta, clutched a photo of her fiancé, killed in the east. "They'll take everything," Greta murmured, her voice breaking. Anna squeezed her arm, but inside, her own fears swirled. The Führer's speeches on the radio promised a miracle turnaround, but the skies filled with Allied planes daily, their engines a drone of doom. Simple facts haunted her. The Americans produced endless supplies, trucks rolling off assembly lines while Germany scraped by. How could they lose to such a machine? Yet the roar grew louder, tanks not theirs rumbling through the hills. They hid in a bombed farmhouse that night, the walls pocked with shrapnel, listening to the world fall apart. Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding at every snap of a branch outside. The propaganda had made the enemy faceless monsters, but in the dark, they felt all too real. What kept her going was the bond with the other women, their shared silence a shield against the chaos. But as spring hinted in the warming air, the inevitable loomed larger. The unit splintered further, some girls vanishing into the woods to find families, others pressing on blindly. Anna stuck with the core group, her radio skills useless now without power. The front closed in, and by mid-April, scouts reported American patrols just kilometers away. Panic set in. Orders were to hold positions, But there were no positions left. They dug shallow foxholes in a field edged by ruined orchards, the earth soft and wet. Anna's mind raced with the stories: torture, humiliation, the loss of self. It fueled a terror that made her disciplined training feel like a lie, her belief in the Reich cracking under the weight of what might come. The contrast stung. She had served loyally, relaying orders that echoed the propaganda, only to face this shadow. When her group finally raised white flags in the misty dawn of April 15th, the first surprise came not from whispering a silent prayer to the fatherland that had let her down so completely. The first U.S. soldiers emerged from the mist like ghosts from the stories, their helmets glinting in the weak light. They were young, most no older than she was, with rifles slung but not aimed. One, a tall sergeant with mud-streaked boots, stepped forward and spoke in halting German mixed with English. "Hands up, but don't worry, you're safe now," he said, his voice steady. Not the snarl Anna expected. They didn't rush or shout. Instead, they formed a loose circle, watching as the girls lowered their arms slowly. A medic checked them over, his hands quick but gentle, asking about wounds through a translator who turned out to be a captured German. Anna flinched when he touched her scraped elbow, but he only nodded and moved on. No blows, no drags into the bushes, just questions about names and ranks, written on clipboards under the rising sun. It felt wrong, this calm procedure, like stepping into a dream where the monsters had forgotten their lines. The Geneva Convention, an international agreement from 1929 that the United States had signed, required humane treatment for all prisoners of war, no matter the side. This meant basic rights like proper food, medical care, and protection from violence, rules the Americans followed closely in their Western camps. By the spring of 1945, over 2.5 million German soldiers had surrendered to the Western Allies, flooding processing stations like this one with weary captives. U.S. Army records show that these new prisoners received immediate basics: a canteen of clean water, often with a splash of coffee, and wool blankets to ward off the chill. For the women, separate handling was standard. Helferinnen, like Anna, classified as military auxiliaries, not civilians, but still afforded respect under the conventions. Anna took the water handed to her, her fingers brushing the sergeant's glove, and sipped slowly. It was cool and pure, tasting of metal from the canteen, a far cry from the brackish streams they'd drunk from lately. A blanket draped over her shoulders next, heavy and warm, smelling faintly of soap and pine. As the processing dragged on, confusion settled over Anna like a fog. Curses. It stirred something uneasy in her chest, doubt, sharp as the morning cold. Had the Führer's voice lied about this too? The lack of violence wasn't just luck, it was policy, drilled into these troops who had crossed oceans to fight. The sun climbed higher as the group waited, trucks rumbling up to load them for transport. Anna sat on the grass, blanket clutched tight, stealing glances at the soldiers who now seemed less like invaders and more like reluctant keepers. Whispers passed among the girls, disbelief, a spark of relief, but Anna stayed quiet, her thoughts churning. The water had quenched her thirst, but not the questions bubbling up. What came next? More of this strange mercy, or the truth hidden beneath? As the engines idled, she realized the real battle was starting inside her, one question at a time. Transported to a temporary camp on the Rhine's edge, Anna saw abundance that mocked her homeland's scarcity. In the Texas sun of a U.S. camp several weeks later, endless supplies appeared where rationing had been Anna's norm, turning her captivity into a bewildering feast. The journey across the Atlantic had blurred into a haze of cramped ships and endless ocean, where seasickness mingled with the stares of fellow prisoners. Now, stepping off the train in the dry heat of central Texas, Anna shielded her eyes against the blinding light. The camp sprawled like a small town under wide skies, rows of wooden barracks fenced with wire. But unlike the grim tales, it hummed with activity. Men in olive drab moving crates, laughter cutting through the air. Guards directed the women to a separate section, their voices firm, but without the venom she feared. Anna's group, down to 8 after separations, followed numbly, their worn shoes kicking up dust. The air smelled of fresh paint and something sweet, unfamiliar, that made her stomach twist with hunger. Inside the barracks, a supply sergeant handed out bundles, clean underwear, wool socks, and shirts that felt soft against her skin, not the scratchy wool of her old uniform. "Wash up first," he said in simple English, translated by a fellow German, pointing to a row of sinks with running water, cold but endless, not the bucketed dribbles, the fatherland's empty promises. The real shock came at mealtime, 3 times a day as the camp routine demanded. By May 1945, the United States held nearly 425,000 German prisoners across sites in states like Texas and Arizona, a number swelled by the war's end when over 3 million Axis troops surrendered in Europe. These camps, run by the U.S. Army, provided standard rations, canned meats, bread that rose fluffy and white, and coffee that steamed hot without a trace of chicory's bitterness. Coffee, a luxury rationed to officers in Germany, flowed freely here, poured from large urns into tin mugs. Anna's first sip burned her tongue, but warmed her from inside, rich and dark, like the stories of American excess. Then came the chocolate, a Hershey bar, its foil gleaming under the mess hall lights. She unwrapped it slowly, the sweet scent hitting her like a memory of childhood treats long gone. One bite, and it melted smooth, not the bitter cocoa paste she'd known, but creamy with milk and sugar. Millions of such bars had been produced yearly in U.S. factories, shipped to troops and now to prisoners, a testament to the industrial might that had outproduced Germany tenfold in war materials. Sitting on a bench with Greta, Anna chewed slowly, the sweetness clashing with the salt of unshed tears. This wasn't just food. It was proof of the lies she'd swallowed. The propaganda had called America a starving giant, its people too soft for real war. But these supplies told another story, endless, efficient, born of factories that never stopped. Her mind wandered to her father's bakery, shuttered for lack of flour, while here bread baked daily in on-site ovens. The contrast gnawed at her. How could the enemy be so strong, so giving, when the Reich preached superiority through will alone? A small detail, that chocolate's wrapper with its simple slogan, "A treat for everyone," unwound a larger myth, the one of decadent foes too busy with pleasures to fight. Anna folded the empty foil carefully, tucking it into her pocket like a talisman. Around her, other women ate in stunned silence, the pain and shame the warnings had promised, but instead it brought a quiet care that left her stunned. It was a routine afternoon, the sun slanting through the screened windows of the infirmary, where a row of cots stood empty save for a few women nursing coughs from the dusty air. Anna had twisted her ankle weeks back on the ship, a dull ache now, but the camp doctor insisted on a look. The medic, a young corporal with a stethoscope around his neck and eyes like her brother's back home, knelt beside her. "Easy there," he said through the translator, his hand steady as he wrapped fresh gauze. No rough pulls, no leering glances, just professional work, the kind her training had taught her to do for German wounded. She pulled back at first, her skin crawling with old fears, but he paused, waiting until she nodded. The bandage felt secure, not makeshift, and when he handed her a tablet for the pain, she took it without question. This was mercy, plain and unexpected, in a place meant for punishment. The U.S. Army medics followed strict protocols for all prisoners, especially women, ensuring examinations happened with same-gender staff when possible and privacy behind simple curtains. Under the Geneva Convention, female POWs like the Helferinnen received separate quarters from the men, often in dedicated barracks with locked doors and female overseers to maintain dignity. By mid-1945, these camps housed thousands, including a small number of German auxiliaries shipped stateside, where medical care mirrored that for U.S. troops, clean clinics, regular checkups, even dental work. Anna learned this bit by bit, watching as Greta got stitches for a cut without screams or slaps, the nurse chatting softly in broken German about the weather back east. It was worlds from the rushed field hospitals she'd known, where supplies ran dry and moans filled the nights. Here, aspirin came in bottles, not precious pills rationed like gold. The medic smiled faintly as he finished, saying something about rest, and walked away without a backward glance. No demands, no debts, just help. Later that day, during yard time when the women walked the fenced paths under the wide sky, Anna found herself near the wire talking to a guard. He was posted there a stick of gum from his pocket. No mockery, just a nod, like equals swapping tails. This kindness hit Anna like a wave of guilt, sharp and unrelenting as she lay in her bunk that night. Back in Germany, her family starved on turnips and rumors, while here she mended under skilled hands and ate bread without lines. The medic's touch had been fatherly, not cruel, triggering memories of her own losses, the brother gone to the front, the mother writing of empty pots. Why give this to enemies? The propaganda had sworn Americans hated them all, but Tom's easy talk peeled back the lies, leaving her adrift. It stirred a shame deeper than hunger, comparing her people's pride to this quiet compassion. She fingered the bandage, a small anchor in the confusion, wondering if the Reich's strength had been illusion all along. As the weeks wore on in that sun-baked routine, conversations like those turned more personal, slowly unveiling contrasts Anna could no longer ignore. Around a campfire one evening in the Texas camp, an American shared tales of home that sounded like paradise to Anna, pulling her deeper into questions about the world she'd known. It was late June 1945, the war in Europe over for months, but the heat lingered like unfinished business. The women had permission for outdoor gatherings on clear nights, a chance to stretch beyond the barracks, and tonight a few guards joined, keeping a respectful distance. Tom, the private from Iowa she'd spoken with before, sat on a log across the flames, his face softened by the glow. The fire crackled softly, casting shadows on the circle of prisoners and keepers who traded words across the divide. Anna sat near Greta, nursing a mug of that ever-present coffee, its steam rising like a bridge between them. Tom started with stories of his farm, the golden fields of corn waving under blue skies, harvests so bountiful they fed families for years. "No lines for bread," he said simply, his voice carrying over the pop of wood. "Plenty for all." It painted a picture of ease, not the crumbling Reich where bread meant queues at dawn. As the talk flowed, others chimed in. Another guard soared to about $223 billion in nominal terms, more than 10 times Germany's war-crippled economy of around $20 billion, fueling that endless plenty from factories that ran day and night. How could the mighty Reich, with its iron will, fall to such a giant built on choice? Letters from home, smuggled or allowed through censors, told a similar thaw. Many German POWs wrote praises of their treatment, like one soldier in a Texas camp describing the hot meals and fair guards to his wife, urging her to see Americans as people, not devils. Records from the camps show hundreds such notes, some even thanking the U.S. for food parcels that reached families in the ruins. Anna had written one herself, hesitantly, about the clean beds and kind words, wondering if her mother would believe it. Tom's story continued, of his sister's school, where girls learned without uniforms or oaths, just books and dreams. It unraveled the Führer's promises thread by thread, the superior race, the eternal struggle. Why had she tapped those codes for a cause that lied so plainly? The coffee's warmth spread through her, mirroring an emotional melt. Her ideology crumbled like stale bread left too long in the open. She stared into the flames, seeing not victory rallies, but quiet farms where life flowed without force. The circle quieted as stars pricked the sky, the stories lingering like smoke. Anna felt a pull, not just curiosity, but a hunger for truths the war had buried. Tom's gaze met hers briefly, a nod passing between them, human to human. But not all encounters were kind. Shadows of trauma lingered. Nightmares from earlier Soviet advances haunted Anna even in the safety of the Texas camp, turning quiet nights into battlegrounds of the mind. It was early July 1945, the cicadas humming outside the barracks like distant artillery, pulling her back to the chaos of Berlin's fall. She woke sweating, the cot creaking under her, the shadows of the room twisting into faces from the ruins. The other women stirred sometimes, their own dreams broken, but Anna kept hers locked away, shared only in whispers with Greta during the dim hours before dawn. The East was worse. Wait without words. The camp's women formed quiet circles then, not formal but natural, huddled after lights out or during laundry duty, voices low as they pieced together survivals. No leaders, just the pull of common pain. Women who had served the same cause, now mending its breaks together. Anna spoke of the panic in the fields, the rumors from the East that made capture by Americans feel like mercy. Greta nodded, her eyes distant, mentioning a cousin lost in the tide. It wasn't therapy, just release, the kind that bound them tighter than orders ever had. Outside, the Texas stars watched indifferently, but inside, those talks wove a fragile net against the unraveling. The Soviet occupation in eastern Germany from April 1945 brought widespread civilian suffering, with historians estimating hundreds of thousands of women affected by violence during the Red Army's advance, particularly in Berlin, where up to 100,000 cases occurred in the final weeks. In contrast, U.S. zones in Western Germany emphasized order, with the Army prosecuting abuses by their own soldiers, courts-martial handling hundreds of incidents, including assaults, to enforce discipline under military law. Women like Anna found informal support in POW groups, where shared stories helped process the scars, much like the quiet networks that formed in other wartime settings for those who endured similar fates. These facts trickled into camp talk through letters and news sheets, painting lines on the map, east as storm, west as guarded calm. Anna absorbed them during a group sit one afternoon, the women sewing patches on uniforms, voices overlapping in hushed tones. The numbers chilled her, millions displaced, families torn. But the American way, with its trials for wrongdoers, stood out like the clean lines of the barracks. No free rein for soldiers here. Rules held even victors accountable. This American discipline highlighted the chasms, her panic at a guard's shadow showing the lasting cuts. But the steady aid, meals without strings, checks without cruelty, nursed a tentative trust. Back in the East's shadow, trust had shattered like glass under boots, leaving her flinching at voices, hiding from touches that might turn rough. Yet here, the medic's care kept the routine going, light tasks like sorting mail or folding linens in the shaded yard. Anna volunteered for the mail runs, drawn by the glimpses of letters that connected them to the world outside the wire. Tom oversaw that detail some days, his post at the gate where packages passed through checks. What started as nods and simple exchanges, morning, in his rough German, her Guten Tag, grew into stolen moments by the sorting tables. He pointed out envelopes from home, translating scraps for her when the words blurred with emotion. Anna found herself lingering, sharing bits of Munich's hills or the bakery's old songs, while he spoke of Iowa's rivers and the family farm waiting. No demands, just questions that listened, his eyes holding hers without the hunger she'd feared from men in uniform. It was disarming, this ease, turning guard and guarded into something almost ordinary. One humid afternoon, as thunder rumbled distant but promising no rain, Tom slipped a small photo from his pocket during the handover. "My folks," he said, holding it out flat on his palm, a faded snapshot of a weathered couple on a porch, smiles wide under a harvest moon. Anna took it carefully, tracing the lines of their faces, so different from the stern Reich portraits. "They write every week," he added, his voice low to avoid the other guards. "Ask about the farm, the war. Want to know if I'm safe." She nodded, handing it back, but the gesture stuck. A window into a life not built on marches or oaths. In the barracks later, she replayed it, the photo's warmth lingering like his words. No tricks, no power play, just trust offered freely. It chipped at the enemy label the propaganda had stamped on him, turning the monster into a son, a brother, a man with worries like her own. Romances bloomed quietly in such camps, despite strict rules against fraternization, with soldiers and prisoners finding ways through shared work or glances across fences, often kept secret to avoid reprimands. Post-war, more than 15,000 German women went on to marry U.S. troops, many starting as these camp connections that deepened after release. The War Brides Act of December 1945 made it possible, allowing foreign spouses to immigrate without quotas. And bright, emerging like a flower in cracked soil. Nights found her replaying conversations, the photos' faces blending with his, stirring a warmth that scared and soothed. The Reich had taught hate, but here it dissolved in simple acts, a shared laugh over a mispronounced word, his hand steadying a falling stack. Guilt flickered. For the cause she'd served, the families divided, but Tom's steadiness quieted it, showing a path beyond sides. She caught herself smiling at his gait shifts, the wire between them feeling thinner each day. As release neared with autumn's first cool winds, choices loomed larger. On the eve of her freedom in late September 1945, Anna faced the ultimate test of her broken beliefs, standing at the camp gate with the Texas sunset painting the wire in gold. Release papers clutched in her hand, she had hours left before the bus took the women to a holding center in New York, the first step toward repatriation or whatever came next. The air cooled finally, carrying scents of dry earth and distant rain. But inside her, a storm raged. Tom waited there, off-duty for once, his uniform jacket slung over one arm, face tense under the brim of his cap. "Walk with me?" he asked, nodding to the path beyond the fence, where civilians could meet on neutral ground. Anna hesitated, the weight of eyes from the barracks pressing, but stepped through the gate for the last time. They strolled in silence at first, the crunch of gravel underfoot like her heartbeat, past the orchards heavy with unpicked fruit. He stopped under a lone oak, its leaves rustling like whispers of doubt. "I can't let you go without saying it," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. "Marry me, Anna. Come home with me, to Iowa, to life." The words hung, simple as a vow, but they cracked her world wide open. Flashbacks hit her like shells bursting. Summer 1943, the train to Berlin humming with pride, her uniform crisp, and the radio's promises filling her ears. America, the weakling, the degenerate horde. She had tapped codes for defenses against them, believing every word. Now, here, under this tree, the lies stacked high as the Reich's ruins. Waiving immigration quotas so foreign spouses of U.S. servicemen could enter without the usual barriers, a policy that sped reunions amid the post-war scramble. Thousands relocated in those years, over 100,000 war brides from Europe and Asia sailing to new lives, many facing cultural shocks like vast supermarkets or endless highways that echoed the plenty Anna had glimpsed. Memoirs from those women often spoke of rebirth, a shedding of old skins in diaries filled with tentative joys, first Thanksgivings, first freedoms without fear. Anna knew this from Tom's careful explanations, the forms he'd helped fill, the vows that bound without force. Yet the facts warred inside her. Reports from returning prisoners praised American homes as havens, but guilt clawed. Had she betrayed by surviving, by feeling this pull? Peak confusion swirled. Marriage a symbol of total collapse, the myths of monsters crumbling to reveal men like Tom, blending her fears with a joy that terrified. Sorrow for the girl she'd been, washing away in tears she let fall. Yes, she whispered finally. The word a bridge over the abyss, her hand finding his. It wasn't erasure of the past, but a step from its shadow, the ideology's weight lifting like fog in morning light. The sun dipped lower, casting long shades, but for the first time, Anna saw a path forward, not alone. The journey across the ocean sealed her new path. Aboard the ship to America in the spring of 1946, Anna clutched Tom's hand through the choppy Atlantic swells, the world remade in salt spray and the hum of engines carrying her toward an unknown shore. The vessel, one of many repurposed troop transports now ferrying war brides, cut through gray waves under a sky that mirrored her swirling thoughts, freedom laced with farewell. She stood at the rail with dozens of other women, their faces a mix of excitement and pale fear, chatter in French, English, and German blending like the foam below. Tom, on leave to escort her, pointed to the horizon where land would break, his grip steady as the anchor she'd needed. The voyage took 10 days from Germany, seasickness giving way to shared meals in the mess, where strangers became sisters overnight. Anna touched the simple ring on her finger, stood idle and full, no ration coupons needed. In Chicago, for a layover, they shared a meal, hamburger and fries, the bread soft and white like clouds, ketchup sweet from tomatoes grown in abundance. Electric lights buzzed overhead without dimming, a far cry from Berlin's blackouts. Anna stared, fork paused, the plenty a final wave washing away the Reich's deprivations. It wasn't just food, it was the ease, the waste even, that hammered home the war's true cost, not bullets, but the minds chained to myths of might. War brides sailed in organized groups from 1946 to 1947, over 15,000 German women among the 100,000 total arriving to join American husbands, many, like Anna, starting in ports before trains whisked them inland. The U.S. government provided aid through programs like temporary housing in military bases and small stipends for settling, helping bridge the gap for those without a dime. Marriages such as hers often mended divides, with veteran accounts later describing these unions as quiet victories of understanding, families blending old wounds into new stories. Anna heard echoes of this on the train from fellow brides, one Polish woman speaking of her GI's patience with her English, another German sharing laughs over cultural clashes. The facts settled like the landscape speeding by. No more foxholes or fences, but real homes waiting. White bread's fluffiness and electric light's steady glow finalized her transformation. The ideology's ruins fading like the receding ocean, leaving room for a life rebuilt on trust and simple joys. Guilt for the past lingered in quiet moments,
But Tom's stories of Iowa's open skies soothed it, turning fear to hope. She leaned on his shoulder, the train's rhythm lulling her toward tomorrow. Years later, reflection brought clarity. Decades on, in the warm glow of her Iowa kitchen, Anna looked back at that April day with quiet wonder, the ruins of Berlin feeling like a lifetime away. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in 1985, 40 years since her surrender, and her grandchildren, 2 boys with Tom's freckles, and a girl with her blue eyes, clustered around the oak table, their schoolbooks forgotten.
Amid suspicion and hope, over 15,000 German women integrated into U.S. society post-war, raising families that blended cultures and often revitalizing old German-American communities with fresh traditions from their homeland. Testimonies in memoirs like Feisty Lydia and others captured these shifts. Women like Anna recounting the quiet triumphs of learning English, joining PTAs, and silencing old guilts to nurture new roots. These unions symbolized broader reconciliation, turning wartime foes into Cold War allies, with brides like her acting as unintended ambassadors in a divided world. Anna shared how she volunteered at the local church, taught German songs to her kids, and watched them grow without the fears she'd known. The grandchildren ask about the farm, the ocean crossing, the tears on that New York dock. She answered softly, her voice steady, passing down not just facts, but the truth that healed. Peace came from facing that truth head-on. The war lost not on fields with tanks and tanks, but in minds chained by lies, freed by small acts of seeing the other as human. Anna's nights no longer held nightmares. Instead, dreams of laughter around this very table, where ideology's shadows had no place. She smiled at the children, tracing their hands with hers, feeling the weight of survival turn to gratitude. The Reich's echoes faded long ago, replaced by the hum of family, the proof that hearts could mend what nations broke. In the end, Anna's journey showed how fear's grip loosened not through force, but through a shared cup of coffee and a hand extended without chains. From dreaded torturers to lifelong partners, it was humanity's quiet power that toppled empires of hate. True battles raged in the soul, won by compassion over cruelty, leaving a legacy of bridges where walls once stood. If stories like Anna's move you, consider subscribing for more tales from history's quieter corners.